Okay, so welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening, and thank you for being a part of the AGM earlier. And for those that came on the very last end, hopefully you thought, "Oh wow, I should have come even earlier and attended the entire AGM." So it's great to have you here. My name is Willard Metzger, and I'm the Executive Director of Citizens for Public Justice. And a big part of our work this early spring here was preparing ourselves for the federal election. Like you, we knew it was going to happen, but like you, we didn't know when it was going to happen. We kept hearing varying different reports. It could be earlier, it could be later, but I'm really proud of our staff that worked well all through the winter in preparation. We were ready to hit the ground running when the election was called. They worked feverishly to make sure that the election bulletin was ready to go to press and would be available in short order after the election was called. We also spent a lot of time looking and being in contact with potential partners who might host with us an election tour. The bulletin very much brought a highlight of the areas that we work on and CPJ, when that would be climate justice and eradicating poverty in Canada and refugee and migrant rights. So the election bulletin brought an update, kind of where we're at, and then presented key questions that should be asked of anybody of any of the candidates. This is We're a nonpartisan organization, so we're not trying to tell people who to vote for, which party to vote for, but we are wanting to encourage people to ask critical questions around the advocacy themes and the policy areas that we are engaged with. And not only did we pose potential questions, we also then provided these are the things you should be looking for in the answers. And so if you haven't availed yourself to the election bulletin, it's still available online. And I would really encourage you to access that, because it's not only a good template during an election, but even post-election, as you want to now begin to engage the MPs and the ministers. Those are excellent questions to ask, and those are still the kind of answers that you should be looking for, the materials you should be looking for in those answers. So it was another great opportunity to go across the country to meet our CPJ members. Many CPJ members have kind of hadn't seen us for a while, and we're just so delighted to be able to have contact. And there were also people that were former members that had many, in fact, that had come and spoke to us and said, I kind of forgot about CPJ, and so it's time to renew our membership. And so we've seen that happen as well. So as I had said earlier, CPJ is eager to meet as many people as we can and to work with as many people as we can. We value coalition. We value working in partnership. We believe that, in fact, we just want to work with anybody who is interested in the common good. So we serve as a bridge between secular, faith-based, unions. It's and we really make sure that we steward that trusted space carefully. We want to work with anybody that is interested in the common good, and we firmly believe that everybody should be interested in the common good, and so that's what drives us forward. So I'm delighted to have on a panel here as we reflect on what is it that we have heard during the election. We're going to have Maryo Wahba, who is our climate justice policy analyst. We're going to have Natalie Appleyard, who is our socio-economic policy analyst, and Miedema, who is our public justice intern working on the refugee migrant rights files. And so they were all engaged in the election tour. And so we are really delighted to be able to bring some highlights and some musings on a very busy April month for us. So maybe to start with, The first question, with respect to poverty elimination in Canada, refugee migrant rights, and the climate justice, where did the key policy debates and processes stand when the federal election was called? So what sort of a status report? Where did we start with? And maybe we'll do it in that order. We'll start with poverty elimination, so Natalie, and then Anna, and then Maryo.
Thanks. Well, certainly it's was no surprise to anyone that in the lead up to the election, there was a lot of talk about housing, a lot of talk about food prices. And so there was a lot of talk, a lot of attention given to the issue of affordability. But unfortunately, one of the points that we made at the time was that talking about affordability doesn't necessarily mean that people were talking about poverty. And things getting more expensive is sometimes different from not being able to afford the what is required for an adequate standard of living. So while there was certainly a lot of attention on housing, food prices, lots of talk about inflation, we saw at the same time some misdirection in terms of what had been causing that. We certainly heard some scapegoating, and so a lot of outrage, but sometimes lacking in substance. So at the time, we had also seen poverty rates that had jumped back up from their lowest levels that they had been since the poverty reduction strategy was introduced, and that was largely due to temporary pandemic benefits. So when those pandemic benefits were canceled, we saw a huge spike in poverty rates where they had actually gone down during the pandemic. Now it's a bit of a two-edged sword because we had also seen, while those poverty rates went down based on income-based measures, we certainly saw really alarming rates of food insecurity and core housing needs. So those things were going on, and these are issues that, as CPJ members will know, we've been raising the alarm bells for a long time. So it was interesting to see that that dichotomy of having those issues in the spotlight, but not necessarily framed in the way that would lead to effective and equitable solutions. So CPJ was really involved with a lot of our partners and coalition members, churches, and congregations across the country, and really trying to get the attention back where it was needed on our human rights obligations, our treaty obligations, to ensure that all people living in this country could access an adequate standard of living. So, amidst all the talk about affordability, amidst many people's, really valid concerns about their financial security, particularly people who probably never thought they would find themselves in that situation. Then, right before the election, with the election of President Trump, we also really saw some heightened concerns about national sovereignty and the economy. And interestingly, from that, we did also see one maybe silver lining, which I hesitate to call it that, but there was sort of a renewed enthusiasm and appreciation for Canadian healthcare. So that was interesting to see in the context of the federal government and provinces negotiating agreements on pharmacare and dental care programs. So that's kind of where we were at before the election, and again, just a general sense of real concern about the pushback on human rights internationally as well as domestically here in Canada.
Perfect. Yeah, so I'll try to keep it a little bit brief. There was definitely a lot of change. And to kind of get again, I will keep it brief, but if we go back to September, I think before before the election, looking at that time, a lot of people thought, working in the area of refugee and migrant rights, that it was going to be a key election issue, especially because a lot of the polling was showing us that there was a lot of increased anti-immigrant sentiment. A lot of people were worried about the number of international students, the number of immigrants that were coming into Canada. And a lot of this was based off of misinformation and scapegoating, blaming migrants for the housing crisis, for increased crime rates, all of these different things. So when we were in September, that was kind of what we were gearing ourselves up for. And then moving to November with the election of President Trump, we noticed, and sort of in the aftermath of that, a little bit of a change in the direction, and a lot more people wanting to seeing what was going on in the States related to migrants, refugees, immigrants, and kind of being so appalled at you know, a lot of the violations of rights that were happening, whether it's incarceration, deportation, and wanting to say, oh, you know, this is Canada, we don't do things like that. When unfortunately, in a lot of cases, we actually do. It's just a lot less obvious to many people. And then, yeah, so that was a sort of middle kind of mood that people were feeling. And then more recently, and sort of before and now, before the election and now rather, a lot of this discussion about the border, because the border discussion is related to the tariff discussion. And when people think about securing the border, often they're thinking about people who are crossing it, whether those people are legal or illegal, or whether they're crossing with ill intent, or a variety of different things. There's a lot more skepticism that is put on these people that are hoping to cross. And we kind of start to have these ideas of who is a worthy person to come to Canada and who is not worthy. So before this election, I'd say there was a definitely a more a mindset of sort of tightening the borders, being more restrictive, and yeah, I'd say that's sort of the general place that we were at when the election happened. So I'll let you go ahead, Maryo.
Yes. Yes, thank you. I'll also try to keep it brief, although it is very difficult to follow such intelligent interventions from the policy staff at CPJ. There was, in the climate justice file, there was also real concern about the deprioritization of climate action and climate justice as a sort of strategically important election issue. And that was due to, as Natalie mentioned, some valid and legitimate affordability concerns, but we also were hoping to show how the climate crisis is one of those primary causes of the affordability crisis, whether it's through extreme weather events or through the sort of appropriation of public funds towards things that contribute to the climate crisis, like fossil fuel subsidies. There was a lot of renewed emphasis and coalition around nation building projects or large projects. And so we wanted to position that towards things that do help the environment, like east to west energy grid and the auto sector. We saw, as Natalie mentioned, after the election of Donald Trump, a renewed attack on Canada's auto sector. And we saw that as an opportunity to electrify Canada's transit fleet. CPJ also anticipated a short election campaign just due to the dynamic of the poll numbers and how the government that was calling the election at the time felt about its prospect. So we knew that would also limit civic engagement capacity, and we proactively tried to position ourselves as one of the first movers, whether it's by producing the election bulletin ahead of many other organizations, or by organizing the election tour. Also in partnership with community partners and coalition members. Our election bulletin was also strategically distributed to those partners so that it would equip voters, both via physical copies and online, to ask those critical questions and also know what to look for in those answers. And we anticipated the potential policy stagnation on climate action and climate policy, just as we saw in how politically toxic the consumer carbon tax has become. but we're also hoping that this would sort of renew and elevate discussions around other aspects of the just transition, like indigenous-led conservation and environmental racism. So there was real concern, but there was also hope that there were different avenues that we can take in order to appeal to the electoral environment a little bit better.
Great, thank you. So, I mean, it's certainly you hear, I think the importance of framing that CPJ is a critical part of, whether it's looking at its lack of housing or it's rather a lack of affordable housing, and what difference does it make when you start to reframe the conversation that way? Or is it important to protect borders, or is it more important to protect human rights? I think those are important framings. So the next question, I wonder, as the election campaign unfolded and as you were with CPJ members at election tour events across the country, what new developments or trends in justice issues did you see developing? And maybe we'll start with Maryo and then go to Natalie and then Anna.
Yeah, thank you. I'll just maybe begin by mentioning I think it's record number of events that CPJ hosted around the country during the course of the election tour. We hosted 17 events, both in virtual and in person. Many of those, if not most, was in person. And at the time the election was called, key climate justice debates included the ongoing fossil fuel subsidies, as I mentioned, and that we found a little bit more appealing to talk about the affordability crisis as something that is, whether directly or indirectly, caused by the outsized profits of the oil and gas industry. So we were able to amplify and promote principles like the polluter pays principle in light of the record-breaking profits by the oil and gas industry. The persistent advocacy by CPJ members also underscored an encouraging counter narrative that I think, despite economic uncertainties and the tariff threats, which is fair to say dominated the news, our attendees of our election events were invited and were able to consistently prioritize long-term justice-oriented climate policies, like, again, the Sustainable Jobs Act, or was known as the Just Transition Act, or that's the name that CPJ advocated for, but they're roughly the same act. And then there were key issues that were still inadequately addressed, like the implementation of the environmental racism bill, which we celebrated the passage of in the last AGM, but we still highlighted ongoing gaps on the comprehensive federal response to frontline communities and their climate impact. And we were able to, again, position ourselves as interested in the public good in a way that is not ideological or set in stone, but rather does look at the numbers and recognizes that something like the fossil fuel industry, having increased its operating profits by tenfold in the past 3 to 4 years, does not need and does not deserve, in light of the climate crisis that we're witnessing, near $30 billion subsidies in the last year, in 2024. So yeah, we were able to bring all of these perspectives and more, and I encourage you to look at the question and answer section of the election bulletin, which framed our arguments in a more engaging way.
I think what I'll speak to in terms of sort of what we were hearing on tour, and what struck me was that there were a lot of people who were, they were just really frustrated with the state of political discourse in Canada at this time, and with sort of the media and the attention vacuum that was happening south of the border, that was really detracting from issues that CPJ members and their community members really care about and really wanted to see prioritized. So while, yes, there were concerns about tariffs and the impact that could have on the economy, Folks who care about poverty and climate justice and refugee and migrant rights hadn't gone away. And there are so many of us. So that's what I find really striking when we do activities like this is, how many people really are working towards that same shared vision. And we can see that in the CPJ members that we get to connect with, the new audience members who maybe hadn't heard of CPJ before, but come to an event because we've partnered with another organization that broadens that audience for us. And the strength of our networks and coalitions, we know that, again, across the country, across sectors, across communities, there are so many people who share our vision for a more just and sustainable society. But a lot of these people are really frustrated, maybe feeling a sense of cynicism, and maybe not knowing where to begin. And I think something that we were able to speak to during the tour that resonated with people was that this is by design. And it's not an accident that that people are feeling that they don't really know what facts they can trust, or that the causes of these problems and the proposed solutions are really being obscured. And you can look at that in terms of just like the platforms that were released, had varying levels of detail in them in terms of like what the proposed solutions actually would be. And so I think our election tour events and the opportunities we've had for great discussion with students and folks in different demographics was that connecting with other like-minded people can be a real antidote to that sense of loneliness and despair, and that sense of not knowing where to begin, because there's so much good work happening. And we just need to connect the dots and make sure that our elected officials know just how many people are watching and are committed to these really rights-based, evidence-based solutions, and that we are willing to support policies that may seem a little radical to some at one point. But if you look at the evidence, and if you look at the realities that people are facing, you see that they're really quite reasonable, and actually they make good economic sense.
Yeah, so I guess mine is my reflection is a little bit similar to Natalie in that way. So I was able to attend a few events virtually, but the one that I was able to attend in person was in Waterloo. And so at that event, we had over 200 people who shared those frustrations that Natalie mentioned, and who were there because this was the only event that was discussing these three issues. So we discussed the three issues that we focus on. So refugee and migrant rights, poverty eradication, and climate justice. And so there's that, again, as Natalie said, this idea that people were all focused on Trump and tariffs. And a lot of that is, focused on me and myself, which for a lot of people is an understandable fear, definitely, when there's a lot of uncertainty. But there are still so many people that we all met, again, across the country, that are really still concerned about these issues. And you can still be concerned about tariffs and realize that we still need to protect refugee and migrant rights and these other areas. So I think one of the realizations that I had was that, there were a lot of people at the event who weren't aware of a lot of the issues that I was speaking to related to refugee and migrant rights. So for example, a lot of people were not aware of Canada's use of immigration detention, which can detain people in provincial jails, and there is no limit for how long they can be detained. We also detain children. A lot of people didn't know that. A lot of people were also unaware of the vast amount of people who are living in Canada who have fallen out of status and find themselves undocumented, unable to access education for their children, healthcare for themselves, safe jobs to provide for their families. So there was a lot of a sort of a renewed reason why we need to be talking about these issues, because people said, if most people knew, about immigration detention, I doubt there are very many people that would see that as a good thing. It's just that a lot of people aren't aware of it. And then the one other thing is that even the candidates that we had there, we had 3 candidates from Liberal, NDP, and the Green Party, and each one of them mentioned that there was something that I mentioned related to refugee and migrant rights that they did not know. So one of them was not aware of the rates of incarceration of migrants. One of them was not aware of the population of undocumented people, which I think made me realize, like, these are people running for federal office who aren't aware of these things. Again, a lot of people there they wanted to protect refugee and migrant rights. That was something they were focused on, but these little issues were things that they weren't aware of. And I think it felt really good to be able to have to be there to talk about these things and to let people know what was happening, because you can't advocate for something if you don't know what's wrong. So yeah, I think that was my biggest takeaway.
Great, thank you. No, it is true. I mean, as it's interesting to hear that certainly the threat of tariffs and the economy, as Anna mentioned, I mean, that's really about us. And CPJ, for over 60 years that we've been in existence, have been trying to help people understand that justice is not about just us, right? It is thinking about beyond, and for people of faith, that should be a natural impulse for us to move towards. So thanks for sharing. Last question before we have some Q&A. So now the election is over, and we're still getting to know who the new government is, who the players are, what the priorities are, but where do we go from here? What are the key policy pushes that you think we'll be making? And what efforts can people join us on in order to work for public justice? So let's start with Anna, and then Maryo, and then end with Natalie.
Yeah, so I think short answer is still figuring it out. Obviously, it's still very new. So recently, we were just chatting as staff in a meeting about sort of the new things that we're using for these sources of information to kind of get a peek at what the next government is looking at. In relation to refugee and migrant rights, it was quite concerning. If we look at using sort of the throne speech, the new Liberal government's platform, and the mandate letters. Some of the only mentions in the throne speech and in the mandate letter was capping temporary migrants, reducing migration, prioritizing economic migrants, and in the Liberal Party platform, there was mention of increasing the speed in which deportations happen for those who are deemed initially ineligible. As well as reducing permanent migration in favor of temporary migration. So whether that's temporary foreign worker permits or international student permits, and then not giving out as many permits for people who are wanting to come and stay and live in Canada. So it feels a little bit like we've taken a few steps back for sure. And we need to, and again, in these platforms, there was very little mention of refugees specifically. I think only once or twice in the Liberal platform, and it was sort of in addition, and still protect the rights of refugees. So I think the work is going to be to bring that to the awareness of the government that this is, again, not only the right thing to do, but we have international obligations through agreements that we've signed on to. We also have domestic agreements in the, the Immigration Refugee Protection Act, and we need to protect that right to seek asylum. That is a very important right that people have, and Canada has so long prided itself on being a welcoming place for immigrants and refugees, and we need to work to maintain that, because at the current pace things are looking at, it's definitely taking a back seat. And we know from reading the news every day, there are no shortage of people that need a safe place to go, whether that's temporarily or whether that's permanently. So yeah, definitely going to take some thinking to find out the best ways to approach this, but it does feel like a little bit more of a taking stock, reassessing where we are, and we may have to take back a few steps and try to work our way up. But yeah, a little bit of a depressing sort of, I guess, view, but there are so many, again, organizations that we work with, wonderful, amazing people, migrants themselves, refugees themselves, who are have been doing this work for decades and are going to continue to. So yeah, we'll be glad to participate alongside them. So.
Yes, indeed. The work continues. I'm gonna speed run through my remarks given the time, but that are again one of our staple annual campaigns, Give It Up for the Earth, continues to mobilize people across the country, faith communities across the country. So we'll be uplifting that, and even for this year's campaign, we're still trying to get a meeting with the Minister of Environment in the new government. Citizens for Public Justice is one of 5 ecumenical organizations that are leading the Canadian expression of an international campaign called for the Jubilee year called Turn Debt into Hope. And that's about debt justice. And many of you who are sitting here are engaged in one way or another. I'd like to invite you to the People's Forum in Calgary, which is happening from the 12th to the 15th of June. And that's in order to shed light on this as an important global justice issue right before the G7's Leaders Summit. We're also moving forward on ensuring that the government acts decisively on the clean electricity regulations. It was one of the regulations that we're proud to contribute to through both budget consultations and lobbying efforts, but it was disheartening to see that goalpost to have a net zero electricity grid was moved from 2035 to 2045 based on the current regulations. So we'll try and continue strengthening that and also increasing Canada's climate finance contributions. I think the one and only contribution to loss and damage, which again, what compensates for extreme weather events from the global south, was $16 million, which sounds like a lot for us normal folks, but that experts have said that this was enough for only 1 hour of climate crisis response. We'll continue our strategic climate litigation advocacy on the Mather versus Ontario case and follow with the further sort of return of the case to the Ontario Court of Appeal, which, as I mentioned already, is unprecedented sort of constitutional victory for the climate movement in Canada. We'll launch a new and improved advocacy toolkit very, very soon, which has always been free to access online. And that the goal of that is really to empower our members to effectively engage with policymakers on all levels, whether it's municipal, provincial, or federal, to advocate for both climate action policies and to advocate for our other policy areas as well. We're also encouraging everyone to amplify CPJ's convening power. So, as I mentioned in the AGM portion, CPJ physically brings together a lot of organizations at the Justice House in downtown Ottawa. But as Willard also alluded to, we work a lot in coalition and we bring together different aspects. So we're going to be excited to even amplify that work of convening different actors in the civil society space. I alluded to major nation building projects. Some of the ones that we will be lifting up are a high-speed rail corridor between Quebec City and Windsor. Community-owned renewables would be along the comment in the chat about co-op housing. Would like to see co-op solar farms and co-op wind farms that are owned by those communities and Indigenous communities on reserve as well. We would like to defend against zombie pipelines that don't have any benefit on either energy security or financial benefit, because if they did, they would have had a private industry proponent, which currently they don't. The only option for a pipeline to be built is for it to be publicly funded or owned by the government. So we want to defend against that. We want to advocate for things like the Greener Homes Grant, which is one of the notable initiatives on energy efficiency and energy upgrades. We want to advocate for the Youth Climate Corps, which is a jobs guarantee for young people under 35 with a living wage that employs them in low carbon jobs. And again, I mentioned the strategy to fight environmental racism. The Canadian Sustainable Jobs Act, which is celebrated its passage, and the impact assessment would like to defend both the emissions cap and the impact assessment, which if you've been keeping an eye on energy policy, the Prime Minister recently mentioned that they would be on the shopping block if they are standing in the way of what a lot of fossil fuel industry is calling for. And we want to strengthen and continue to defend amendments to the Competition Act that were anti-greenwashing. And then just to comment on the carbon capture, storage, and utilization, our views are well aligned with the views of the membership. It is a fake solution that will take a lot of time and money, and will never be economic, and will just give license to the fossil fuel industry to continue their production. But yeah, I'll leave it at that.
I'll maybe just respond to a quote from the speech from the throne that was delivered on Tuesday. It says, "The government is guided by its conviction that the economy is only truly strong when it serves everyone." So that's a great start, and something we can certainly hold them accountable to and tell them that we want to work with them on. Unfortunately, the next line that follows reads, "Many Canadians are struggling to get ahead." This is a gross understatement. Many Canadians are struggling to survive, and many are not. And so while we want to work with the government to support their goals of building more homes, of creating a strong economy, we want to make sure that we're saying yes, and the way you do that is through rights-based policy approaches that are grounded in evidence and that respond to people's lived experience. So we need to make sure that the focus is on closing those equity gaps in terms of who has been left behind systemically, and make sure that we're upholding those human rights and treaty obligations. And so we need to push back against false solutions like privatization and profitization of public programs like healthcare, like housing. We need to push back against the rhetoric of tough on crime and increased criminalization. And we need to push back on these trickle-down approaches like middle-income tax breaks, like building any homes instead of building affordable homes, in the hopes that, I believe the government specifically said that they want to build their way out of this housing crisis. And that's not going to work. Because it's not just about supply, it's also about the financialization of the sector and the deregulation of tenant rights and our human rights obligations. So these are, I know we're very short on time, and I could list many specific policy initiatives that we're working on, from housing security to income security and basic income, food security, healthcare, but you'll find that all if you continue to follow our work and join with us. And I will just mention that, again, as Maryo mentioned, the importance of our coalitions and convening. We will be pushing for some of these broad solutions, pushing against these forces that are being experienced across sectors through things like a People's Report for the Second World Summit on Social Development, which is scheduled for November, through things like our Poverty Trends Report. And I would encourage you to please, when that comes out in October, invite us to come talk to your congregation about it, to your community group, your school. We've had really great engagement, and as Anna said, a lot of people just care about these things, but don't have the information that they need, and that includes your elected officials. So there's a tremendous amount of human rights education that's needed, and treaty education in this country. And so we would love for you to be part of that with us, and to help us bring that word of conviction, but also hope and conviction that a better way is possible. We have evidence-based solutions to tackle this. What we need is the public and political will. So we look forward to working together on that.
Great, thank you. Thank you all. And thank you for the rich dialogue in the chat as well. That's been wonderful. We're past the time we said we would end, but we would like to, at least if there are some a pressing question or two, we won't take a lot of time, unfortunately, but if you have something to put into the chat as a question, that would probably be the best, or use the raised hand feature. But we'll just take a couple minutes if there are any pressing questions. Okay, and we won't wait long, and that's great. I thank you for the engagement in the chat. That was wonderful to see. And maybe we'll just end our time here together with great gratitude for you. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for the staff for your input. We wanted to give you a bit of an insight in our conversations and in our activity through the month of April. Very frantic and busy time, and also invite you to consider being, if you're not a member of CPJ, as a policy advocacy and lobby group. Numbers are important to us as we meet with elected officials. We need to be able to say that there are more and more people in Canada that are aligning themselves with these concerns, and so. Membership is more than just a way of financially supporting us. It is a way in which it supports our lobby efforts. And any financial donation entitles you to a membership. And that's important as we speak to ministers as well, as we say that to be a member, you have to give a financial donation. So this represents more than a signature on a petition. These people are invested. They're serious about these matters, and so that's why we think you need to be serious as well. So please, thank you for many of the supporters that are here. We appreciate you deeply, and in a time like this when there's lots of uncertainty in the economy and fear of tariffs, it's a tough sector now. The charitable sector is a tough sector right now. It's under a lot of strain. And so thank you for your continued support, and we invite increasing continued support. That way we can continue to advocate boldly and strongly on your behalf for these issues that we agree on. And as Natalie has said, Anna as well, others, it's just that many people, they feel like they're alone. And where do we go to start to really coordinate these efforts? Well, that's what CPJ does. And so yeah, it would be great to have you continue to do this efforts with us. So thank you all. Thank you for your participation. And I think we will end just in time for us all to go and treat and cheer the last remaining Canadian team in the NHL Stanley Cup final rush. So thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.